The choice before you could not be clearer. Forward in freedom or backward in socialism.
They want to tell you when you can go to work and even how many hamburgers you can eat.
To them, we're all just bad because we're all just blue.
Come on, America. Defunding these vital positions is not the answer.
As Joe says, come on, man.
Restoring safety for our people cannot be done from your basement, Joe.
Violence and destruction are not legitimate forms of protest.
President Trump believes in you.
Hallelujah. My faith in justice and mercy was rewarded.
Every issue important to black communities has been a priority for him. What is racist is the fact that African Americans have the highest abortion rate.
President Trump rebuilt our military and added the Space Force.
4 years ago, I told you I would fight alongside my father, and 4 years later, here I am.
I profoundly accept this nomination for President of the United States. Joe Biden is not a savior of America's soul. He will be the destroyer of American greatness. The fact is, I'm here. What's the name of that building? The fact is, we're here and they're not.
Well, good evening once again. As we approach the midnight hour here on the East Coast, so begins day 1317 of this Trump administration, leaving just 67 days to go now until the presidential election. And after 4 nights, virtually, the Republican National Convention is now actual history. Donald Trump, as you heard, formally accepted his party's nomination before a crowd of about 1,500 people on the White House lawn. They were there and in place for hours, a scene unlike anything witnessed in modern U.S. political history. The gathering evoked the pre-COVID Trump rallies, few people masked, no attempt at social distancing. And during the event, the death toll in our country grew. As all of it was going on, hundreds of protesters gathered in Lafayette Park across the street from the White House compound now heavily fortified. This final night comes as our nation grapples with crises on multiple fronts, and the messaging was often at odds with reality of a spreading pandemic, social unrest, and economic devastation. While Trump offered up the past 3+ years in making his case for 4 more, the night was also devoted to unrelenting and largely unfounded attacks on Joe Biden, warnings about a country at risk, descending into violent chaos if the former vice president should win in November. You won't be safe, is the quote about Joe Biden's America. Let's talk about all of it as we welcome our big 3 back to the broadcast tonight. Claire McCaskill, former Democratic senator from the state of Missouri. Michael Steele, former chairman of the Republican National Committee, former lieutenant governor of Maryland, now the host of the Michael Steele podcast. And Jason Johnson, veteran journalist, contributor at the Griot, and a professor at Morgan State University. Welcome to you all. Claire McCaskill, the floor is yours. Your reaction to what you've just seen.
Well, there are so many things that Donald Trump has done and failed to do that I am bitterly disappointed about and disagree with him profoundly. But I will never forgive him for what he did at the White House tonight. Turning the White House into a sleazy political function is not what this country is all about. I honestly, my heart is broken. When I saw political banners stretched across the South Lawn of the White House, when I saw him coming out of the White House like a monarch at the beginning of his speech, am I angry? Yes, but I'm heartbroken. And I got to tell you, I think this president has misjudged the American people. I think he is so into the visuals of a TV program. He is so hyper-focused on how things look and it looked beautiful. And that's what he wanted. It looked like there was a big crowd, and that's what he wanted. But it was jarring to the American people. And I had so many of my non-political friends texting me that they were horrified at this abuse. He thinks people like politics in America. Most Americans don't like politics. They put up with it because it's an important part of their democracy. And some of us, really like it a lot. But most Americans don't, and they don't want the White House to be an instrument of a political campaign. They don't. So I think he's made a real miscalculation here. And then I'm not even going to go to the COVID stuff. I'll leave that to my colleagues, and if they miss it, I'll circle back around. But I actually think that the image that he portrayed tonight, when he thought it was so good for him, I think it's going to do him damage with those independent voters that may be wavering.
Michael Steele was giving credit where credit's due. Was he good at least at creating an alternate reality where therapeutics and cures are right around the corner in a booming economy with life returning to normal and things looking up?
Yeah, that worked for Trump world. That is exactly the sound and the imagery that he wanted to create. So I agree and slightly disagree with Claire. And so let me start with the agreement. Like her, I grew up in Washington, D.C. So the White House for me is just another house in the neighborhood in one sense. But in another sense, it is the people's house. It's where I remember as a kid looking at that house through that wrought iron gate and just thinking about what it meant, because my parents had taught me a lot about it. What we saw tonight was a disservice to the American people. It was a cheapening and a devaluing of the people's house. So I hope America, and this goes to where I slightly disagree with Claire, but I really do hope she's right here. But this works. These visuals work. People feed off of this. Remember, Donald Trump created his audience over 14 years, and he turned them into his voters. Donald Trump gave them the pablum of reality television, spectacle, drama, visuals, and that's all this was for him. And so I really hope, to Claire's last point, that people look at this and are repulsed by it. Because I can assure you, if this is the pathway for this country, that this house is just another house, it's just a prop that we can throw placards in front of, we have fallen very, very far. Final point, if I could, Brian. What struck me about this speech tonight was actually he could have killed the first 1 hour and however minutes of it and just did the tagline, "We're here, they're not." That was his clapback to Barack Obama. When Barack Obama, in meetings with Republicans at the beginning of his administration, who Republicans were upset about some things Obama was doing, he looked at them and said, "We won, you didn't. And so you lost." So the reality of this is the completion of that circle for Trump. And again, Obama's always not that far from him in terms of his ability to deconstruct the man and tear down part of his legacy. So that for me was the more compelling moment here, because it said a lot when he looked at that house and said, "We're here, they're not."
Jason Johnson, one clarifying thing, while millions of Americans are having a moment, we see it on television every day and every night. They're going deep on law and order. Just Rudy Giuliani's speech, he proclaimed all Black Lives Matter, then later added all lives matter, which must have come as quite a comfort in your household.
Yeah, Brian, the sort of law and order element to this was not impressive. It didn't move anybody. And the sort of cavalcade of black people that they managed to put out there who are not known, who are not credible, who are not reasonable, it's very obvious that most of this convention was not geared towards persuadable voters, of which I don't really think there are any of this more. It wasn't aimed at black people. It was aimed at white people who want to tell themselves they're not racist for voting for this administration. And I'll be honest, unlike, Claire and Michael, yes, I was disgusted. Yes, I was upset. But quite frankly, I just watched a criminal act for 2 hours. This was a crime. Everybody knows this was a crime. You can't have political events from the White House. I have said this before. Every single person here knows what it's like to run a local campaign. You can't make a fundraising call from the State House in Annapolis without potentially getting in trouble. And they just had the last night of the RNC in our house as American citizens, as taxpayers. I watched a criminal act from a criminal president who has no interest in democracy, and he made that abundantly clear in his speech tonight. The only thing that I am remotely comforted by seeing this cavalcade of nonsense for 2.5 hours is that the ratings are terrible and nobody likes him. And most people weren't watching. And my hope is that while Americans have already decided how they're going to vote in this election, that even the clips they see from this evening are a reminder of the grotesque incompetence, racism, and corruption that has infected our White House, and why we don't want and cannot believe the possibility of 4 more years of this.
Claire, pick right up there. The political cartoonists, when Donald Trump was first elected, gave everybody a good laugh with various depictions of the White House with the Trump name on the front. Well, tonight, during the wide shot, if you squinted, it appeared that that was emblazoned on or in front of the White House because of the signage in lights that you mentioned. Counselor to the President of the United States was his hype woman tonight. She walked out to Elton John's "I'm Still Standing" for reasons known but to the Lord. But I don't know how many Americans are discussing the Hatch Act tonight. But if you and Michael and Jason are correct that this was an ongoing 2-hour criminal matter, who do we see about that?
Right.
Well, first of all, just to make sure people understand, the Hatch Act is the law that said to me that I could not make or take a political phone call in my office in the Hart Senate office building. That when I was doing a radio interview with a station back home in the Senate radio studio, I couldn't talk about anything political. Every single member of Congress understands you do not cross the line between politics and the government resources. And so that is against the law. Technically, the president and vice president cannot be held accountable, but members of his administration can. Now, there's not enough teeth in the Hatch Act, and I do think this will be a Trump legacy. I think the Democrats will, I hope they take the Senate, and even if they don't, I'm willing to bet that you're going to see the Hatch Act enhanced. A little note of irony here. That's what Mark Meadows was trying to do when he was a member of Congress. He was trying to strengthen the Hatch Act back when he was not this lawless president's chief of staff. So there will be complaints made. There will be investigations done. They're just counting on none of that coming to pass in the next 67 days. But speaking of infecting, I do think it's important to remember why they said they were doing it at the White House. They said it was too hard to move the president during a pandemic. Oh, great. So then they hold a super spreader event at the White House. I mean, their rationale is so obviously a lie. And if anybody wants to believe this president cares about whether America is struck down by this deadly virus, take a look at that shot. Do you think he cares?
Right.
He could care less. And he showed it tonight speaking of visuals, in the most visual way possible.
Michael, if we can put this graphic up from an interview Peter Baker did with the president today. President was asked for his second-term agenda, and this is a minefield, but I'm going to very carefully try to quote it. I think it would be very, very. I think we'd have a very, very solid. We would continue what we're doing. We'd solidify what we've done, and we have other things on our plate that we want to get done. First of all, Michael, you're going to need a bigger bumper. But secondly, is this
you do this to me, Brian. You do this to me, man, every time.
Does he need a thesis statement for such a base-centric event?
Oh, okay, let me collect myself. If they could put that back up, I'll tell you what's the most important thing in what he said there, and it's at the end when he says, "We have other things on our plate that we want to get done." People, you have been forewarned, and he has foretold what's coming. If you think what he's done right, if you think tonight was a spectacle and a violation of laws and ethics, if you think what we saw this past week in terms of how he's approached the very painful realities of COVID-19 and how he's talked about 180,000 dead Americans, that sentence right there, you take that and you write it down on a piece of paper and take it with you when you vote. And just remember, this is why you need to vote him out, because it's the other things they plan to do. That's the problem. And with a feckless leadership that's not prepared or has the ability to check him, hello.
Yep. Jason, I got to ask you the tough love question. What do you do? What does the movement that is presently afoot in so much of America do about the fact that the visuals out of Kenosha, with a hell of a lot of outside support, including but not limited to a backward 17-year-old with an AR-15, the visuals from Kenosha and Portland and Minneapolis match the narrative of every speaker tonight, match the Law and Order campaign and their plea to get people from that silent majority, people who agree with them in their hearts, may not even admit it to a pollster.
So, Brian, I think that's a really, really important question to understand where our electorate is today. If you go outside and you see that kind of violence and that kind of destruction, you would be afraid. But here's the catch. We're not going outside because there's COVID, because people are trapped in their homes, because they're sheltering in place. And while Donald Trump can spend as much time, and Rudy Giuliani and Tom Cotton and Ivanka can spend all the time they want talking about danger in the streets, they ignored throughout this entire RNC and tonight what the last 6 months have been to people. We're not going outside because people don't have jobs, because they're afraid of COVID, because they've been fired from their jobs because of COVID, because they pray every single morning that if they have to send their children to school, that those children won't come back sick with COVID, either from campus or the local elementary school. So I think that while that fear-mongering of protests and violence on the one hand may scare some people, their daily reality is infinitely more dangerous, and that is the kind of thing that Donald Trump hasn't really addressed one way or another. And I have to say, this is very important to understand when we're talking about the Hatch Act and violations. I am old enough to remember I was in school when Bill Clinton got in trouble for supposedly selling nights in the Lincoln bedroom, right? That was a big, big scandal at the time. It is important for us to remember and focus on the fact that we have a president who is not actually running a re-election campaign. This is merely him advertising to the world that he will do whatever it takes to stay in power. The Democrats are running an election campaign. They want votes. Donald Trump doesn't care about votes. He just wants to stay in power. And whether that means abusing the White House in imagery or fact, or shutting down the post office, or threatening people, or blatantly lying, that is what he's going to do. So when people go to the voting booth, if you decide to leave your home because you don't trust the mail, remember, you are removing a proto-dictator from power. He told you tonight what he's going to do, and it is not going to be good for you, your family, or anyone else you know going forward.
Ladies and gentlemen, that is why we invited these three guests to start off this hour. Claire McCaskill, Michael Steele, Jason Johnson, our thanks. We know it's a lot to react to tonight. And as we head to a break, we want to share with